Imagine this. What if you could see your own death before it happens? What if you had just moments to stop it? My name is Alex, and I found myself in that exact situation. One moment I was just a high school senior about to embark on a school trip to Paris, and the next, I was standing face to face with a terrifying vision of my own demise. This is my story. What if I was the main actor in Final Destination? And let me tell you, what unfolded was nothing short of horrifying. It was supposed to be the perfect trip. My class and I were about to board Flight 180, ready for an unforgettable journey to Paris. As I stood there at the airport, my excitement was mixed with nervousness. There was always something eerie about airports. The long lines, the constant buzz of announcements, and the looming thought of flying thousands of feet above the ground. But today, that feeling was stronger than ever. As we went through security and made our way to the gate, I couldn't shake off this unsettling feeling. My friends, Clear, Carter, and Todd, were chatting and laughing like nothing was wrong. I tried to focus on their conversation, but something in the pit of my stomach told me this trip wasn't going to go as planned. Maybe it was just pre-flight jitters, or maybe it was something much worse. I boarded the plane, and as we took our seats, I started to feel claustrophobic. The seats were too tight, the air felt too heavy, and every sound seemed amplified. My heart raced, and I could barely focus on the safety instructions the flight attendants were giving. Little did I know, this was the calm before the storm. As the plane taxied down the runway, something strange happened. Suddenly, everything around me seemed to freeze. The chatter of passengers faded, and I felt a sharp chill run down my spine. Then it hit me, a vivid, horrifying vision. I saw the plane explode in midair, tearing apart like it was made of paper. Fire, screams, chaos, all of it overwhelmed my senses. The smell of burning metal and flesh was so real it made me gag. I snapped back to reality, gasping for air. My friends stared at me, confused. "Are you okay?" Clear asked, her eyes filled with concern. I couldn't speak, couldn't move. All I knew was that we needed to get off this plane, now. The vision was too real, too vivid to be just a nightmare. It was a warning. I stood up abruptly, shouting, "We have to get off! The plane is going to crash!" The passengers around me started to panic, some yelling at me to sit down, others looking just as scared as I was. Flight attendants rushed over, trying to calm me down, but I couldn't stop the overwhelming feeling that death was coming. The next few minutes were a blur. Somehow, a group of us were forced off the plane. Me, Clear, Carter, Todd, and a few others. The doors closed behind us, and I watched as Flight 180 took off into the sky, disappearing into the clouds. For a moment, I thought I had made a huge mistake. Maybe I had overreacted, maybe the vision wasn't real. But then, just as I was about to calm down, it happened. A deafening explosion echoed through the terminal windows. Flames burst into the sky, and I watched in horror as the plane exploded midair, just like in my vision. Debris fell from the sky like confetti, and the screams from the terminal were drowned out by the sound of death. I collapsed to the ground, shaking. The others were in shock too, some crying, others staring in disbelief. We had just cheated death, but that wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. News of the crash spread quickly. Reporters flooded the terminal, capturing every tearful moment. Survivors like me were being questioned about why we had left the plane. How could I explain it? How could I tell them that I had seen the future? I kept to myself as much as I could, replaying the vision in my head. Was it really over? Did we actually escape death? I wanted to believe that everything would go back to normal, but deep down I knew that wasn't true. Something darker was lurking, something that wasn't done with us yet. I wasn't the only one who felt it. Clear approached me later that day. "You saw it, didn't you? The crash, before it happened," she said softly, her eyes wide with fear. I nodded, feeling a cold shiver creep up my spine. But why us? Why did we survive? That question haunted me. Why did we get a second chance when everyone else on that plane didn't? As much as I wanted to believe we were safe, a small part of me knew that we weren't. Death wasn't something you could escape forever. Days after the crash, strange things started happening. Todd, my best friend, was the first to go. It was a freak accident, or at least that's what everyone said. He had been alone in his bathroom when it happened. I don't know all the details, but they said he slipped and strangled himself with the shower cord. But I knew it wasn't just an accident. I couldn't shake the feeling that Todd's death was connected to the plane crash. It felt too eerie, too coincidental. And then, the nightmares started. I kept seeing Todd's death over and over like it was some kind of warning. Clear, and I started to investigate. We dug through old newspaper articles trying to find anything that might explain what was happening. That's when we stumbled upon a terrifying realization. Death had a plan, and now that we had cheated it, it was coming for us, one by one. After Todd's death, I couldn't sleep. The vision of his lifeless body, the cold reality that death wasn't done with us, kept replaying in my mind. I knew there had to be signs, clues that Todd's death was more than just an accident, but the idea of cheating death again felt impossible. I started noticing strange patterns. Little things seemed off, like the gust of wind that blew a sign right in front of me as I was crossing the street, or how my alarm clock always went off a minute earlier than I had set it. It was as if something was trying to tell me that death was still watching, still waiting. Clear felt it too. "I keep seeing shadows ... in the corner of my eye," she told me one day, her voice shaking. "It's like someone is following me, but when I turn around, there's no one there." I nodded, understanding all too well. We needed to figure out how to stay ahead of this. We started looking back at the plane crash, trying to make sense of why death would have a design. That's when Clear pointed something out. "Death has an order," she said. "Everyone who died in that plane crash. It wasn't random. It followed a pattern." It hit me like a ton of bricks. Todd was the first to go after the crash because he was seated closest to the explosion in my vision. If death was following the same order, the rest of us were next, one by one. And I knew who would be next. I rushed to Carter's house, panic gripping me like a vice. Carter had been sitting near Todd on the plane, which meant he was next in line. The thought of him being taken just like Todd filled me with dread. Carter had always been the tough one, the guy who thought he could face anything. But how do you fight death itself? When I arrived, Carter was out with his car, speeding around like nothing was wrong. "Carter!" I shouted when I finally caught up with him. "You have to stop! You're next, don't you get it?" He brushed me off, laughing. "What? You think death is some kind of ghost that's chasing us? Come on, man, that's crazy." But I could see it in his eyes. Deep down, Carter knew I was right. He just didn't want to admit it. As we argued, I noticed something. A loose piece of metal on his car's engine. My heart skipped a beat. "Carter, get out of the car!" I screamed, running toward him. But before I could reach him, the metal snapped and his car spiraled out of control. It crashed into a nearby power pole, the impact sending sparks flying everywhere. Carter was thrown from the car, and before I could even react, a wire snapped from the pole and hit him. His body convulsed as electricity coursed through him, the smell of burning flesh filling the air. I stood there, paralyzed with fear. I had been too late. Death had claimed him. Carter's death shook me to my core. It wasn't just the horror of seeing someone I knew die. It was the realization that no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't stop it. Death was always a step ahead, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I gathered the remaining survivors, Clear, Valerie, Billy, and myself. We needed to figure out a plan, some way to break the cycle. "We're being hunted," I said, my voice barely steady. "Todd, Carter, it's not over. We're all going to die unless we figure this out." Billy, usually the jokester, looked terrified. "So what do we do? Just wait around until it's our turn?" he asked, fear written all over his face. Clear was more focused, though. "There has to be a way. Maybe if we skip our turn in the order, we can cheat it again." That gave me a sliver of hope, but it also felt impossible. How could we skip death's order when we didn't even know how it worked? Still, it was the only plan we had. As days passed, I started to notice the signs more clearly. Strange coincidences, shadows moving out of the corner of my eye, the feeling that something unseen was always watching me. Clear and I kept close, sharing whatever small hints we could find. She was convinced that understanding the signs was the key to staying alive. One day, she pulled me aside, her face pale with fear. "I saw something, Alex," she whispered. "In my dreams, there was water and then fire. It felt so real. I think I'm next." I could see the terror in her eyes. It wasn't just a dream. It was another vision, another warning. "We can't let it happen," I said, trying to keep calm. "We'll figure something out." But deep down, I was scared. Clear was one of the strongest people I knew, and if she was afraid, then things were worse than I thought. We kept a close eye on Billy after Clear's warning, but death was always unpredictable. It struck when we least expected it, and when it came for Billy, there was nothing we could do to stop it. We were walking near the train tracks, trying to keep our distance from anything dangerous. But Billy, always the curious one, wandered too close. The crossing gates came down out of nowhere, trapping us on the other side. I screamed for Billy to move, but it was too late. The train came speeding toward us, its horn blaring. Billy froze, and in that moment I saw the loose piece of metal on the track. I knew what was about to happen, but I couldn't get to him in time. The train hit the metal, sending it flying through the air. It struck Billy before we could react, decapitating him instantly. I fell to my knees, screaming. Death had taken him, just like it had taken Todd and Carter. It wasn't done with us, not yet. Billy's death left us shaken, more so than any of the others. It wasn't just that it happened so fast, it was the feeling of helplessness that washed over us. No matter how much we tried, no matter how many precautions we took, death was relentless. We couldn't escape it. Clear and I barely spoke after that. The air was thick with dread. Every noise, every movement felt like it could be a sign. The rules were clear now. Death was coming for us, and it was only a matter of time before it took the rest of us. But that didn't stop us from trying. We had to at least do something. I became obsessed with trying to predict who was next and how it would happen. I pored over the seating chart from Flight 180, retracing the steps of the crash and each death that followed. If I could just figure out the pattern, maybe, just maybe, we could break it. But every time I thought I had it solved, something happened to shake my confidence. Clear stayed by my side through it all, though I could see the strain taking its toll on her. "What if there is no way out?" she asked one night, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't have an answer, but I couldn't give up. Not yet. After Billy's death, we turned our focus to Valerie Luton, our teacher, who had also survived the plane crash. She didn't believe any of it, didn't want to believe it. When I tried to warn her, she looked at me like I was crazy, brushing me off as just some paranoid kid. But I knew better. The signs were there and I couldn't ignore them. Valerie was next in line and I had to do something, anything, to stop it. I went to her house, desperate to explain the pattern, to make her see that death had a plan. She refused to listen. "I can't live my life in fear because of some crazy theory, Alex," she said, her voice cold. "I've moved on. You should too." But I couldn't leave. I watched as she walked back into her house, slamming the door behind her. The pit in my stomach told me something was terribly wrong. I stayed outside, pacing, watching for any signs of danger. And then, I saw it. A small spark inside her house. It caught my attention and I knew it was happening. I rushed toward her front door, banging on it frantically. "Valerie, get out! Something's wrong!" Inside, chaos erupted. The spark turned into a flame which spread quickly through the kitchen. I could hear Valerie screaming. I tried to break the door down, but it was too late. I heard a crash, followed by the sound of glass shattering. As I pushed my way inside, the heat hit me like a wave. The fire had taken over and there was nothing I could do. Valerie was gone. Watching Valerie's house burn to the ground felt like the last straw. I had tried to warn her, tried to save her, but it was pointless. Death wasn't something you could outrun. It didn't matter how fast or how far you went. It would catch up to you eventually. Clear and I stood together, watching the flames lick the sky. "It's going to be me next, isn't it?" she said, her voice trembling. I didn't want to admit it, but the pattern was clear. Clear was next in line, and after that, it was me. I couldn't lose her. Not after everything we had been through. "We can still stop it," I said, more to myself than to her. There has to be a way. But the truth was, I was running out of hope. We had tried everything, investigating the signs, avoiding dangerous situations, even staying away from anything that seemed remotely suspicious. None of it had worked. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were living on borrowed time. Every breath we took felt like it could be our last. Despite the fear gnawing at us, Clear and I weren't ready to give up just yet. We came up with a plan, a way to escape death's design, at least temporarily. "We need to break the order," Clear said. "If we can interrupt the pattern, maybe we can throw death off." It sounded crazy, but it was all we had left. We figured that if we could save the next person in line, or at least delay their death, it might give us more time to figure out what was really happening. But we were running out of time. Every second felt like death was lurking closer, ready to strike again. I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was just around the corner. We packed our bags and left town, hoping that putting distance between us and the places where the others had died would somehow make a difference. But deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before death caught up to us. We couldn't escape it forever. We ended up at an abandoned cabin, far from town. It was quiet, too quiet. The wind howled through the trees, and every creak of the floorboards made me jump. We sat in the dim light, both of us on edge, waiting for something to happen. Then it did. A loud crash echoed through the cabin, and we both jumped to our feet. The windows rattled and the lights flickered. Something was coming for us. I could feel it. Clear and I stood back to back, our breaths shallow and rapid. We knew what was coming, but we had no idea how to stop it. The room seemed to close in around us, the air growing colder by the second. I heard a faint whisper, almost like a breath of wind, and then I felt it. A force, invisible but undeniable, closing in on us. It was death. Clear screamed, and I turned just in time to see a beam of wood fall from the ceiling, narrowly missing her. It was trying to take her, just like it had taken the others, but I wasn't going to let it. I grabbed Clear's arm and pulled her out of the cabin, running as fast as we could. Behind us, the cabin collapsed in on itself, consumed by whatever force had been hunting us. But even as we ran, I knew it wasn't over. Death wasn't done with us yet. We didn't stop running until we reached the edge of the forest, gasping for breath. Clear collapsed to the ground, clutching her chest. "It's not going to stop, is it?" she asked, tears in her eyes. I shook my head. "No, not until it takes us." But then something clicked. "Clear, maybe if I sacrifice myself, I can break the chain." Clear's eyes widened. "No, Alex, you can't." I looked at her, determination settling in my chest. "If death wants me, maybe taking myself out of the order will stop it from coming for you." The thought terrified me, but it was the only idea we had left. It was my turn, and if I faced death head on, maybe, just maybe, it would end the nightmare. The weight of my decision hung heavily in the air. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became that there was no other way. Death was relentless, unstoppable, and the only way to save Clear was to step into its path myself. If I could disrupt the sequence, maybe I could throw death off course. Clear refused to accept it. "There has to be another way, Alex. We can't just give up." Her voice cracked with emotion. She wasn't just scared for me, she was scared for herself, for both of us. But I had already made up my mind. "It's the only way, Clear. If I go next, it'll skip you. I have to do this." I could see the fear in her eyes, but more than that, I could see the hurt. She didn't want to lose me. I didn't want to lose her either, but I wasn't going to let her die if there was even a sliver of a chance that I could save her. We drove for hours that night, putting as much distance between us and the ruins of the cabin as we could. The car headlights cut through the darkness, but no matter how fast we went, the feeling of being followed never left. Every mile felt like borrowed time. Every turn felt like we might stumble into death's grip. But as we drove, something shifted in me. I wasn't running anymore. I was heading straight for the end of the line. Clear sat silently in the passenger seat, her hands trembling slightly. She had tried to convince me to turn back, to find another way, but she knew I wouldn't change my mind. We both knew what needed to be done. I pulled into an empty parking lot, the engine humming softly as I turned it off. "This is it," I said, my voice barely audible. Clear looked at me, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Alex, please, don't do this," she pleaded. But there was no more time for arguing. I had made up my mind. We got out of the car, the night air biting against my skin. The parking lot was eerily quiet, the distant hum of streetlights the only sound around us. It felt like the world had stopped, waiting for the inevitable to happen. I stood there, taking in everything for what felt like the last time. The wind rustling through the trees, the smell of gasoline lingering in the air. I tried to savor these final moments, even though fear twisted my insides. Clear stood a few feet away, watching me with tear-filled eyes. I could tell she wanted to say something, but the words wouldn't come. She was as helpless as I was. I closed my eyes, preparing for whatever came next. Death was near. I could feel it. The air was heavy with its presence, and all I could do was wait. Suddenly, a loud noise rang out, a crackling sound like something was breaking. I spun around, searching for the source, but there was nothing there, just the darkness. Then, in an instant, everything happened at once. A gust of wind picked up, and I stumbled backward, my heart racing. I could hear Clear shouting my name, but her voice seemed distant, muffled by the roaring in my ears. My body tensed as I braced for the inevitable impact, whatever form death had chosen for me. And then it hit. Something sharp pierced through the air, slicing past me with incredible speed. I barely had time to react before I felt it, a searing pain in my side. I gasped, clutching at my ribs, blood seeping through my fingers. The pain was overwhelming, but the worst part was the realization that it was over. Death had come for me, and it had won. Clear screamed, rushing to my side. She knelt beside me, her hands shaking as she tried to stop the bleeding. "Alex, no, you can't leave me!" But it was too late. I could feel my strength slipping away, my vision darkening at the edges. "Clear," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "You have to keep going." Tears streamed down her face as she shook her head. "I can't do this without you." But she didn't have a choice. The pattern had been broken. Death had claimed its prize, and now Clear had a chance to live. I woke up in a daze, my body aching, the taste of copper in my mouth. At first I thought I had died, that death had finally taken me. But when I opened my eyes, I realized I was still alive. Barely. Clear was beside me, her face pale, her hands covered in blood. She had somehow managed to get me into the car, racing toward the nearest hospital. "Hold on, Alex, please hold on." I wanted to tell her it was okay, that I had done what needed to be done. But my throat was dry and the words wouldn't come. All I could do was close my eyes and hope that death had been satisfied. For now. The hospital was a blur of lights and voices. I was rushed into surgery, the pain in my side almost unbearable. But through it all, one thought kept running through my mind. Had I really broken the chain? Or was this just another cruel twist in death's plan? When I woke up in the hospital bed, Clear was sitting next to me, her eyes red from crying. "You're alive," she said softly, as if she couldn't believe it herself. But the relief in her voice was short-lived. Even though I had survived, the fear lingered. We didn't know if death would come for us again, if it was just waiting for the right moment to strike. Weeks passed, and I slowly recovered from my injuries. But even as my body healed, my mind remained trapped in a constant state of fear. Every creak of the floor, every flicker of the lights felt like a warning. Death hadn't forgotten us. It was still out there, watching, waiting. Clear tried to stay positive, telling me that we had won, that we had cheated death. But deep down, I knew the truth. We hadn't escaped. We had only delayed the inevitable. And as much as I wanted to believe that we could live normal lives again, the shadow of death would always be there, lurking just out of sight. One night, as I lay in bed, I had a terrifying thought. What if the cycle hadn't really been broken? What if, by surviving, I had only set a new chain of events into motion? Death had a plan, and it wouldn't stop until it had claimed every last one of us. I turned to Clear, who was sleeping peacefully beside me. I didn't want to wake her, didn't want to scare her, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, that death would return sooner than we thought. And when it did, we would be powerless to stop it. The weeks of silence that followed were torture. It was like waiting for a storm to hit, knowing it was coming but not knowing when. Every day felt like another countdown, with death's shadow looming over us. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat without thinking about who would be next. It wasn't long before I started to notice the cracks in our so-called victory. Little things at first, like Clear getting into minor accidents or the feeling of being watched whenever we were alone. The sense of dread built slowly, creeping into every part of our lives. It became harder to convince ourselves that we had escaped. Deep down, I knew death was still playing its game. Clear tried to distract herself by returning to normal life. She enrolled in college, went out with friends, and pretended like things were okay. But I could see through it. I knew she was terrified, just like I was. Every time she left the house, I felt the fear that she wouldn't come back. One night, I confronted her about it. "Clear, we can't keep pretending everything is fine. I know you feel it too." She looked at me, her eyes weary from all the sleepless nights. "I don't know what to do anymore, Alex. I thought we could beat it, but..." Her voice trailed off. The unspoken truth was hanging in the air. Death wasn't done with us. One night I had another vision similar to the one I had on the plane. This time I saw Clear, standing in the middle of a street as a car came speeding towards her. I could see every detail, the screech of the tires, the terror in her eyes, the sickening crunch of metal as the car slammed into her. I woke up in a cold sweat, gasping for breath. The vision felt so real, just like the one that had saved us before. But this time I didn't know if I could prevent it. I couldn't shake the image from my mind. I knew I had to warn Clear. I couldn't let her die like that. But how could I protect her from something I couldn't control? The next morning I told Clear about the vision. She listened quietly, her face pale as I described what I had seen. "Alex, are you sure this is happening again?" I nodded, my heart pounding. "It felt just like the plane. It's real, Clear. We have to stop it." Clear seemed to believe me, but there was a sadness in her eyes. "I don't know if we can stop it this time." Despite our fear, we came up with a plan. We would avoid any situation that resembled the vision. Clear agreed to stay away from busy streets, and we made sure to keep an eye on anything that could be dangerous. But deep down, we both knew that if death wanted her, it would find a way. A few days passed without any incidents, but the tension was suffocating. We were constantly on edge, waiting for something to go wrong. Then, one evening, it happened. Clear and I were driving home from the grocery store when the brakes on our car started to fail. The pedal went limp beneath my foot, and no matter how hard I pressed, the car wouldn't slow down. We were careening down a hill, heading straight toward an intersection. "Alex!" Clear screamed, gripping the dashboard. I yanked the steering wheel to the right, trying to avoid the traffic ahead. The car swerved off the road, crashing into a ditch. The impact knocked the wind out of me, but I managed to crawl out of the wreckage. Clear was next to me, shaken but unharmed. We had escaped, again, but I knew this wasn't the end. The accident felt like a warning. Death was closing in on us and our time was running out. The car accident shook me to my core. I realized that no matter how hard we tried, we couldn't outrun death forever. The signs were getting clearer. Death was coming for us, one way or another. That night, Clear and I sat together in silence, both of us too afraid to speak. We had come so far, survived so much, but it wasn't enough. The vision of Clear's death still haunted me, and I knew it was only a matter of time before it came true. I wanted to protect her, to keep her safe, but how could I fight something I couldn't see? Something that seemed to be everywhere, always waiting, always watching. The truth was, I couldn't. All I could do was hold on to the time we had left and hope for a miracle. For the next few days, there was an eerie calm. No accidents, no visions, just an unsettling silence that felt like the calm before a storm. Clear and I kept our distance from anything dangerous, but the tension between us grew. We were both on edge, waiting for the next strike. Clear tried to stay optimistic, but I could see the fear in her eyes. Every time we stepped outside, it felt like a death sentence. I didn't want to admit it, but part of me wondered if maybe we should stop running. Maybe it was time to face whatever was coming. but another part of me wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. One afternoon, Clear decided to go for a walk in the park near our house. I stayed behind, too nervous to leave the safety of our home. But after a few hours, I started to worry. She should have been back by now. I grabbed my keys and rushed to the park, my heart pounding in my chest. When I got there, I saw her, standing by the edge of a small lake. She turned to smile at me, but before I could respond, I saw it. A tree branch, heavy with ice from a recent storm, cracked above her head. "Clear, move!" I shouted, running toward her. She looked up just in time, dodging out of the way as the branch came crashing down. Another close call, another moment where death had nearly claimed her. But how many more close calls would there be before death finally got what it wanted? After the incident at the park, Clear and I knew we were living on borrowed time. The close calls were getting too frequent, too precise. Death was tightening its grip, and it was only a matter of time before we couldn't escape. We started avoiding anything remotely dangerous, driving, cooking, even leaving the house. But the tension between us grew unbearable. It was like we were prisoners in our own lives, constantly waiting for the next strike. "Alex, we can't keep living like this," Clear said one night, her voice shaky. "I don't want to spend the rest of my life in fear." But what other choice did we have? Death was relentless, and it wasn't going to stop until it had us. It wasn't long before the pressure became too much to bear. One night, after yet another argument, Clear decided she couldn't take it anymore. "I can't keep hiding, Alex. I need to live my life." I wanted to stop her, to convince her that we needed to stay safe, but I could see the determination in her eyes. She wasn't going to let death control her anymore. "I'll be careful," she promised, "but I can't let this fear consume me." And with that, she left. I stood at the doorway, watching her walk away, my heart sinking. I knew that by letting her go, I was risking everything. But how could I hold her back when all she wanted was to live? That night, I had another vision. This one was different, though. Instead of seeing Clear, I saw myself, standing at a crossroads with two paths in front of me. One path led to darkness, while the other led to light. But as I stood there, unable to choose, the ground beneath me began to crumble. I felt myself falling, spiraling into the abyss. When I woke up, I knew what I had to do. I couldn't keep running from death. It was time to face it head on, to accept whatever fate had in store for me. Because no matter how hard we tried to escape, death would always find a way.